I was working the night shift at a small logistics warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that felt forgotten even during the day. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most nights it was just me and one other guy, Tariq, who handled the loading docks while I monitored the security room. The job was easy: watch the cameras, log deliveries, and occasionally walk the perimeter, but the silence always felt heavier after midnight. Around 2:15 a.m., I remember glancing at the wall clock as the second hand ticked louder than it should have, like it was echoing in the room. The monitors in front of me showed the usual empty aisles, stacked boxes, and the dim yellow glow of the outdoor floodlights. Nothing ever moved at that hour. That's why it stood out when camera 7 flickered. It was positioned at the far end of the storage area, near a section we rarely used. At first, I thought it was just a loose cable or a glitch, but then I noticed something change in the frame. One of the stacked pallets looked slightly off, like it had been nudged. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting, trying to compare it to how it looked earlier. I was sure it hadn't been like that before. I grabbed the radio and called out to Tariq, asking if he had gone into the storage area. There was a pause before he answered, his voice crackling through the static, saying he was still outside by the loading bay and hadn't gone in for over an hour. That didn't sit right with me. I kept watching camera 7, waiting for another flicker, another sign of movement, but everything stayed still. After a minute, I told myself I was overthinking it. Still, something about it felt off enough that I decided to check it out in person. I left the security room, the hum of the monitors fading behind me as I stepped into the main corridor. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, and my footsteps echoed more than usual against the concrete floor. As I walked deeper into the warehouse, the air felt colder, almost damp. I reached the storage area and immediately noticed how quiet it was, like the entire place was holding its breath. I turned the corner toward the section where camera 7 was pointed and stopped. The pallet I had seen on the monitor wasn't just slightly moved, it was completely out of place, sitting at an angle that blocked part of the aisle. I felt a chill run up my back. I knew for a fact it hadn't been like that earlier in the night. Trying to stay calm, I stepped closer, scanning the area for any sign of someone hiding or moving between the stacks. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I expected. No response. Just the faint hum of electricity from the overhead lights. I circled the pallet, checking behind it, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no dropped items, nothing that suggested someone had been there recently. I told myself maybe Tariq had moved it and forgotten, even though he said he hadn't. As I turned to leave, I heard something, a soft dragging sound, like something being pulled slowly across the floor. It came from deeper within the storage area, beyond the reach of the brighter lights. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I waited a few seconds, then took a cautious step forward. The darkness ahead seemed thicker somehow, swallowing the edges of the shelves. I took another step, then another, my heart beating louder in my ears. That's when the sound came again, louder this time, followed by what I could only describe as a quick shuffle, like someone trying to move quietly but failing. I immediately reached for my radio, calling Tariq again, asking him to come inside. This time, there was no response, just static. I tried again, louder, but the radio only hissed back at me. My grip tightened as I realized I was completely alone in that section. I backed up slowly, not wanting to turn my back on whatever might be in the dark. As I reached the edge of the lit area, I glanced once more into the shadows, and for a split second, I thought I saw something shift between the shelves, something that wasn't there a moment before, and then the overhead lights above me flickered and went out. When the lights went out, it wasn't a gradual dimming, it was instant, like someone had flipped a switch just for that section. One second I could see the rows of shelves and the concrete floor beneath me, and the next I was standing in complete darkness. For a moment I didn't move. I just stood there, trying to listen past the pounding in my ears. The warehouse had always been quiet, but now it felt different, like the silence had weight to it. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, nearly dropping it before I managed to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut a narrow path through the dark, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. I immediately turned it toward the aisle where I thought I had seen movement, but there was nothing there, just empty shelves and stacked boxes. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there a second ago, just out of reach of the light. I called out again, louder this time, asking if anyone was there. My voice echoed off the metal racks and came back to me in a way that made it sound like someone else was speaking at the same time. No reply. I backed up another step, then another, trying to retrace my way toward the main corridor. That's when I heard the dragging sound again, much closer now, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around quickly, sweeping the flashlight across the floor, expecting to see someone crouched or hiding, but the beam landed on something that made my stomach drop. The pallet I had just checked, the one that had been sitting at an angle, was now directly behind me, blocking the path I had just come from. I froze, trying to make sense of it. There was no way it could have been moved that fast without me hearing it clearly. I stared at it for a few seconds, my mind racing, then slowly stepped closer. The wood scraped slightly under my shoe as I nudged it, confirming it was real, solid, and definitely not where it should have been. My first thought was that someone was messing with me, maybe Tarek trying to scare me, but that didn't explain the radio going silent or the lights cutting out. I grabbed the edge of the pallet and tried to pull it aside, but it felt heavier than it should have, like it was being held in place. I stopped, letting go, suddenly aware of how exposed I was standing there with just my phone light. That's when I heard it again, not the dragging this time, but a slow, deliberate set of footsteps, somewhere off to my right. They weren't loud, but they were clear enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. Each step had a slight pause between it, like whoever, or whatever, was making them was taking their time. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, my hand shaking slightly, and caught a brief glimpse of something moving between the shelves. It wasn't enough to make out a person, just a shape shifting from one shadow to another. I took a step back, my heel catching slightly on the uneven floor, and that's when the footsteps stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. It felt like whatever was there was now completely still, listening, just like I was. I held my breath without realizing it, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Seconds passed, maybe longer, and then my phone screen flickered. The flashlight dimmed for a split second before returning to normal, but that was enough to make my chest tighten. I knew my battery had been almost full earlier. Trying not to panic, I forced myself to move. I stepped around the pallet, squeezing through the small gap between it and the shelf, keeping the light fixed in front of me. Every instinct was telling me to run, but I didn't want to trip or lose my footing in the dark. I just needed to get back to the security room, where at least I had working lights and a landline. As I made my way down the aisle, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. At one point I thought I heard a faint whisper, too quiet to make out words, but close enough that it felt like it was right behind my ear. I spun around, shining the light wildly, but again, nothing. Just the empty warehouse staring back at me. I finally reached the main corridor, where the emergency lights were still on, casting a dull red glow along the walls. The sudden change in lighting made everything feel even more surreal. I didn't stop walking until I got back to the security room, my hand shaking as I reached for the door handle. When I stepped inside, the monitors were still on, but several of the camera feeds were now just black screens. The ones that were working showed empty areas, nothing unusual. I quickly checked camera 7, and my breath caught in my throat. The storage section was visible again, fully lit this time, but the pallet I had just struggled to move was back in its original position, exactly where it had been at the start of my shift, as if nothing had ever been disturbed. I stared at the screen, trying to process it, when the radio on the desk suddenly crackled to life. Tarek's voice came through, sounding strained, asking me why I had been calling him earlier and then just gone silent. I grabbed the radio, asking him where he was, and he replied that he had been outside the entire time, but something in his tone made me uneasy. Before I could ask anything else, he added, almost hesitantly, that he had just seen someone standing inside the warehouse near the storage area. Lo,